Welcome, everybody, to the All Elite Zone podcast. This is Talking Elite. Connor, unfortunately, could not make it tonight, so it'll be just Adam and I. Adam, how are you doing, buddy?
Doing all right, man. Yeah, no, it's a two-man team tonight, I see. So I guess we'll have to make do with it. Connor, we miss you.
He's the Hope Connor. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're so we get back on next. Yeah, it's gonna be a fun show. I think we're on to our tonight. We are having a very fun talk tonight. Comment rate. And so tonight is let's have a conversation on some of the greatest tag teams going from the 80s, going all the way up to where we are at today. So we'll talk about, of course, the Golden Era. We're going to talk about the Monday Night War with WCW and, of course, WWF at that time. We'll talk about the Ruthless Aggression era, and then we'll work our way up to modern ROH and Impact Wrestling and, of course, New Japan. Dang it. Can you hear me all right?
I mean, you keep coming in and out, Lane. You're in and out. So I don't know if it's your internet, but you keep coming in and out.
I don't know why I'm having such a huge issue. I've had internet problems last couple of weeks. I don't know why. All right, I think we are good now. Am I clear
area.
now?
It's probably your area.
It's. Yeah. Oh, by the way, people, do not get AT&T internet.
Why would you?
It's tech tip for the day.
It's the worst internet to get.
Anyway, yes. All right. So, with the coming of WWF once Vince McMahon took over from his father, you had the golden era of WWF, and there was a lot of different quirky teams. So, Adam, for you, when you think like 80s tag team wrestling, what comes to your mind?
Well, I'm gonna go late 80s because I was an 87 baby, and I think they were just getting started in the late 80s, but they were huge. They kind of grew in the 90s, but they kind of got their start in the 80s on the WWF circuit, and that's the Road Warriors. I loved the Road Warriors. Some of their earlier stuff, like they weren't what they were or what they became in WWF. They were kind of like a prototype of what they were, riding the motorcycles with, the Mad Max kind of look to them, about like a wasteland look to them. But you see them, and they kind of came to their own as the late 80s, early 90s kind of snowballed into it. With the WWF, but you knew you were getting a good time when you heard that song. Ooh, what a rush! Like that's
Ooh, what a rush!
Yeah, you knew it was going to be a great tag team match.
Very too.
Lane, you keep going in and out again, bud.
All right. Of course. Anyways, did you watch their Dark Side of the Ring episode?
I did. I thought it was a really good episode. I have to go back and think about it because I haven't watched it in a long time. I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember watching it. And I knew Animal had a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Or was it Hawk? I can't remember which one it was. It might have been Animal. I think Animal was the one.
I think it was Hawk, yeah.
Oh, Hawk. Yeah, Hawk was. Because Animal was laryngitis. So, yeah, Hawk. I know Hawk had a lot of issues with drug use and all that stuff. And I know Animal, Mr. Laurinaitis tried to help him, but there was like no going back. So I know he had a lot of issues personal.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I thought it was a really good episode. Really delved into their start as a team. And they did a lot of like, even before the WWF, they did a lot of like Mid-South wrestling and all that stuff. And I think they were part of like Jim Crockett's NWA
Japan.
In Japan. They were really huge in Japan. In the early 80s, they were big in Japan.
Yeah, it was one of those things that like I remember wrestling matches, basically a couple of years ago when I got out of that bubble of modern wrestling. So, when I watched that episode on quarantine actually. And so after that, I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with those guys, watched a couple of their matches from Japan. And, there was a lot of things I didn't know about in that documentary. So I thought Ethan brings up, and of course you had Owen, you had the British Bulldog, you had the Advil. The Advil team in that bunch. Another team that you could also bring up too were the Bulldogs. I think they were another good, tag team.
Yes.
But going with the Hart Foundation, though, like I said, I think especially with the Anvil, I thought he was probably one of the like best powerhouses there.
Yeah, I think him and Owen teaming up.
He wasn't. He wasn't.
I think when him and Owen started teaming up, I think that's when you saw some of the best technical wrestling. I think because you had the two styles clashing in the ring with Owen's technical and then a mix of Jim's technical / face like hard hitting kind of wrestling. But yeah, no, I agree. The Hart Foundation, I mean, was a big established team in the early days of WWF. I mean, they're what helped WWF get over in Canada. I mean, that was the big Canadian team for them that WWF found success and an audience in Canada. So I think it was a smart move to have that.
Yeah. Another like team that a lot of people talk about is the Rock and Roll Express. That was another big team right there.
I actually have.
I feel like there was a lot of expresses. Really? Okay.
Yeah, I have them listed because I have a full list on my phone of like the error like tag teams.
Oh wow, cool.
So
yeah, like Rock and Roll Express. There's a lot of expresses back then, wasn't there?
Yeah, you also had the Midnight Express too.
Yeah, the Midnight Express.
That's when the Midnight Express and Rock and Roller Express were really huge in NWA. That's where they got most of their like big like fan support was the NWA, and that kind of grew. And then obviously with the mid to late 80s when Vince McMahon kind of bought WWF from his father, he kind of grew it in the I can't even say the word, the glamometer or whatever it's called, the big global phenomenon it is now. And pretty much teams from all these other promotions pretty much just flocked to WWF. I mean, and you mentioned them, the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, all those, you can't forget the Rockers too, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels, you had them blow up in the 80s, they became popular. So.
Yep, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. I think that was probably one of the best heel turns, at least in that era. Like, because, look at how many tag teams we've seen over the years split up. I feel like that one is still one of the most memorable, like, splits, of any era, really. Just having, Shawn Michaels super kick him through that barbershop, that window. That will stick in my mind probably until either something drastically happens or I die. It was one of the best moments of professional wrestling, especially of Shawn Michaels' career, because it's kind of sad what happened to Marty, but you see how Shawn Michaels' career, he just kept going up and up and up and became, Mr. WrestleMania.
Yeah, no doubt. But even though they had a great feud over that, and you kind of get that now as part of a story with a lot of tag teams breaking up, where one turns heel, one is face, and they obviously face each other. It goes with it's kind of the MO for a lot of promotions to do with the tag teams to break them up like that. But I think you're right. I think the trajectory of Shawn Michaels and Jannetty, I also think that WWF saw a star in Shawn Michaels, and unfortunately, in Marty's case, they didn't really see a star in him because he wasn't the look that they were going for. If a lot of people remember the early days of WWF, there's a lot of ideas of how Vince McMahon would look at the wrestlers. I mean, you look at someone like Hulk Hogan, big, muscular, blonde hair. Shawn Michaels, blonde hair and a good-looking cut kid. So he wanted to go for bigger, strong guys, but also clean-cut, good-looking young guys. To try to get that audience.
That's still the baby face,
Yeah.
But you had that Texas Tornado. You had, Owen to an extent had that, clean cut baby face look. It was kind of it was one of those that kind of was once I think Shawn turned on, Marty, I think soon after, you had probably one of the best eras of professional wrestling that, a lot of fans kind of hold, true into their hearts. And that's the Attitude Era, and your WCW and your WCW and Raw, and there was a lot of great teams and things to come out of that era. So we'll start with the. Do you want to start with WWF or do you want to start with WCW?
Let's go WCW. Yeah.
All right, let's go WCW. So for me, when I think WCW, the one team that really stands out to me, besides the NWO, I would have to go with Harlem Heat. I feel like they were one of the teams that was on that show. I know we did a watch along, and I can't remember who they faced. It was more of a country boy team, but it had the Colonel as their manager. I can't remember who it was, but
I think I know you're
watching
about.
I
know who you're talking about. I can't remember their team name.
Yeah, and it was one of those ones that with Harlem Heat, it was just so much fun watching them in the ring. You could tell there was a good chemistry there, no matter who they faced. And for me, especially looking at and seeing a young Booker, and seeing how far he came he was a great tag team wrestler, but then coming up and being almost like a Shawn Michaels, where he was a great, Intercontinental champion, 5 time. And he was it was such a great, because I didn't watch WCW back in the day. I was a baby when WCW was around. But you go back. I kind
of remember watching some of it in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, and to see how, like I said, Harlem Heat and seeing Booker, and man, he's still was one of the best talents on that roster. Very underrated for sure. Who would you think, when you think WCW, Adam? What team comes to your mind?
I actually got a couple, and actually I will agree with you on Harlem Heat. It was also really cool to see, you had the Nation of Domination, in WWF, but they kind of stemmed later on from where Harlem Heat was. So it was kind of cool to have, like I say, it's cool to have luchador wrestling represented in a promotion. It's cool to have these. I mean, I'll say it's cool to have an African American team that actually is being represented in a promotion, and being pushed. And they both were very talented wrestlers. So I could agree with you there that Harlem Heat was a really cool tag team to watch in WCW. Another group I can always remember is the Steiners. The Steiners were another team.
I was about to say, yes.
The Steiner brothers, man, were they awesome. And for me too, because as a young kid who wrestled, like watching a tag team that actually wear the headgear on TV. Like I'm like, dude, that's ridiculous. Like they're wearing headgear. Like that's cool. Like as a kid who wrestled, I'm like, oh my god, I have to wear headgear. They wear headgear in this. This is cool. And they were just really brutes, man. And I loved watching the Steiners, the Steiner recliner,
It's still a brutal move, man.
Oh yeah, no, and Scott Steiner with the holla if you hear me, like that's always a good time. And then another team I think of is the Nasty Boys. I don't know if you
Nasty
remember the
Boys,
Nasty
yes.
Boys. Yeah, it was Jerry Sags and Brian Knobs were the Nasty Boys. Man, were they fun to watch, man. They just had their own style. And the way they threw punches where they kind of like get jiggy with it. It was kind of like an ode to like Dusty Rhodes. You know how Dusty Rhodes would do his shake, rattle, and then throw a punch.
Yes.
But I always loved watching the Nasty Boys. I don't know why, but they were fun to watch when they came on TV on WCW. So I would say those three teams pretty much: Harlem Heat, the Steiners, and the Nasty Boys were kind of what I feel were the early days of WCW. So
yeah, I feel like I think what kind of overshadowed it a little bit, at least in that kind of time frame, was you had probably two of the biggest factions in wrestling. You had D-Generation X, and then you also had the NWO. And
right.
A star that kind of crossed both over in the Attitude Era, the team that, you had, part of the Clique. It's funny how they were probably one of the best tag teams in WCW, but Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, the bad guy. And to see, and like I said, they had a lot of great tag matches with both companies, and then having that be in WCW with the NWO, and where everybody was in the NWO towards the end, but they were one of the best factions in wrestling. I don't say a faction, really necessarily a faction show, but to have those two, it was such a fun dynamic when they first appeared on WCW. When that first night was just. It sent chill. Every time I go back and watch it, it sends me chills.
I mean, you also have to remember some of the great, moments. But and I know it's not a Monday Night War theme, but with those teams, I mean, those were the two biggest teams. I'll go 2 points on this matter, and then we can move on. But you got to remember that in WCW,
yeah,
you not only had the black and white NWO, but you also had the NWO Wolfpack with the red. So they kind of split that off into two factions.
Yeah, you had the Wolfpack, yes.
Yeah, so you had a whole different. So you had guys jumping from black and white to the Wolfpack, guys jumping from Wolfpack to the black. So you had this whole storyline where all these guys were just jumping ships between the two NWO factions. All the while, WWF is being dominated by DX, who is just recruiting guys. You had Triple H trying in Shawn Michaels, then they recruit the New Age Outlaws, and then they recruit Sean Waltman. So yes. And then you have that infamous invasion setting when DX went to where WCW was broadcasting from, just down the road from where they were doing, so you gotta say back in the heyday of the Monday Night Wars, like those two factions, even though the NWO was split into two, those two factions were dominating television back in the early 90s, mid to late 90s.
I think before we move on, going to, with, the Raw side of the war, another team, comes Horsemen. Yeah, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson. Two of the best workers in, really any, any company they worked for. But like I said, but looking at how those two worked, they were very smart on how they worked their punches, their selling. They knew how. Arn knew how. He was one of the best wrestlers, I would say, in WCW.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Arn and the way, and then you see Arn's son Brock, kind of having almost adapting his dad's style of wrestling in the ring. You know, the heavy hitting, here, spine buster, and how he uses his elbows with hits, and his punches, and how he punches like his dad. So it's really cool to kind of see that passed down to a generation. From father to son. And I know we're probably going to start moving into new different decades here, but I kind of want to touch upon a couple of other tag teams from earlier days. They're not even part
of course.
Because
let's put up.
No, because I was going to say there's a couple teams I want to touch upon.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the Four Horsemen. I know it's a faction, but sometimes you'd see them tag team. The Four Horsemen were kind of a tag team. Two guys would be wrestling part of the crew. And then obviously we wouldn't have this certain rule in pro wrestling if it wasn't for them, but the Fabulous Freebirds. We wouldn't have the Freebird rule.
Yeah, the Freebirds, the Von Erichs.
Yeah, no, I'm saying we wouldn't have the Freebird rule where tag teams of like 3 or 4 guys can switch the tag titles. You saw that, and it was because of the Freebird rule. So where any 2 members of the team can be tag team champs. So, but I just wanted to touch on those teams as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing and if you go back and watch, the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, they had some of the best matches of wrestling, period, whether it's tag team or, it was really basically a civil war between wrestling. It was probably one of the best moments of that golden era. And even before that too, they were, like I said, the Von Erichs are still talked about down here in Texas. The Freebirds, without the Freebirds, we wouldn't have entrance music.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't have, because they came out. They were the first ones to come out to music, and they came out to, of course, Freebird. But yeah, we got in. So like I said, thanks to those guys, we have some of the best entrance. Of every period, probably go down and pick out different entrance music. But thanks to them, the New Day were able to split the tag team duties. Because of that, they were able to bring that rule in. So yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the best things. SCU, I can't remember if it was 100% confirmed, but they were able to. I think they were able to defend the title with no matter who it was. So yeah, the Freebirds definitely. Ethan, and we'll get to these guys a little bit later. But the Dudleys, another great team that will be coming up after. Of course, their ECW run was great. And they have a whole into this, but yeah, a great team for sure, trailblazer in the sport. And then Ethan also says, I don't know these guys. Do you, the Bastion Brothers?
Yeah, I know them. They had a
for sure.
They had a short run in the WWF back when they changed it to the WWE. They were an interesting tag team. I wouldn't say they're a memorable tag team, but they were an interesting tag team. And I think one of the most interesting thing about them was their valet lady. She was tall as hell, taller than both of them. And they had this little
really
they had this run where they'd wear leather, and they'd be dominants or something like that. It was a weird kind of run for the Bashams. And then at some point, I think the Basham, and then at some point the Basham brothers teamed up with JBL when he was WWE champion, and he was part of their cabinet. So they had a weird, interesting run with WWE. I have a lot of knowledge of weird crap in wrestling. I just don't know why, but that's what I remember about the Basham.
Yeah, that was another. Yeah, I need to go back. I need to watch them because I'm still getting the Impact, so I'm gonna have to go watch them. I'll go watch. I'll do some homework, and I'll touch base with you guys next week on the Bashams, and I'll see if I like them. Because I know the Dudleys, and I love the Dudleys. So another fun thing that another fun team that I just thought about randomly just because Anthony Bowens was talking about it on Chris Van Vliet's podcast. Bill and Chuck.
Yeah.
The two very close bros that almost had a wedding. Very interesting.
I believe that was like the first gay tag team represented on TV, even though neither one of them were gay. But it was actually, Chuck might have been in real. No, that's not who I was thinking of. Was Chuck really gay in real life?
I think they're both straight.
I know. Okay,
no, I think they're both straight.
I know Chris Cannon. Chris Cannon had a secret life about it.
Chris Cannon.
Everybody remembers that. Yeah, about the whole Dark Side of the Ring. He had that secret life, and he was trying to hide it so much, which I felt bad for the guy. It's like, dude, just be you. Just be you. I know it sucks, but be you. But no, Bill and Chuck. Yes, I remember that one. That was another interesting team.
Did you hear the story that apparently due to Chuck's, he wasn't able to appear, but he was going to come out, and his gift from the Acclaimed was going to be Chuck. And they're going to have a reunion on Dynamite. And it almost happened, but Chuck had a previous engagement that night. So, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been awesome.
It's another one of those things. It's so weird to see, him go for, Daddy Ass himself go from Bill and Chuck to the New Age Outlaws and D-Generation X.
Yeah.
Like it's so ass man. You didn't know. Well, your ass better call somebody. It was one of those. That's when I think really sports entertainment was starting to take more over, like compared to, you had a lot of like goofy characters in the 80s. But man, D-Generation X, you gotta admit, they were probably one of the most funniest acts, and especially they were probably one of the best and funniest acts on either promotion. They were they were that ones, and especially like you said, to see almost really everybody really evolved during that time frame. Triple H, that's when he really he started coming away from that Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And then starting, to come out of a shell and then, eventually become the Game. But man, just going back and watching some of those promos and the whole, when the FCC was trying to censor them, just to have that, that moment when they're like, we can't say ass, dick, cock.
Yeah.
On those words. It was in context, people. Don't cancel us. It was in context.
Yeah. No, but you also have to go back to the ECW days. I mean, we just talked about them, the Dudleys. Dudleys were pushing the limits in ECW, man. They had fans hating them. There was times where riots almost started because of the Dudley Boys in ECW. Full-on fights because Bubba Ray knew how to freaking insult people in the crowd. There's so many times he'd get in someone's face, man. It's that parallel line where how to play your character, and DX knew how to play that whole, the whole breaking the rules, being degenerates. But Dudleys were all like, we don't care. We're the Dudleys. We're going to talk to you the way we're going to talk to you. How we are, And I miss the stuttering Bubba Ray, I do. I really do miss the stuttering Bubba Ray Dudley.
Yes.
And God bless his heart, for being in his 50s, he looks solid, man. If anybody watched that Full Metal Mayhem match between him and Josh Alexander, holy cow, man, that guy is in shape for being in his 50s.
It's crazy how much he's really came man, he like I said, he's really he wasn't really not the best of shape when he left WWE, but man, he really got back into it. So yeah, Bubba, another great team, and we'll even talk more about especially with the TLC matches they had, with Edge and Christian and the Hardys. That was probably one of the best. It was one of the best. It was one of the best tag team moments of. Toward the end of the era and transitioning into the Ruthless Aggression. Because it was right on the border of the invasion angle, right? Is when
it was pretty much
era was kind of ending.
2001, I believe, was the first TLC match. And then maybe 2000. 2000 might have been the first TLC match, and then you had 2001 was like TLC 2. They had a lot of tables matches, obviously, because of the Dudleys. The one match I remember is the Dudleys versus the Hardys at the Royal Rumble. They had that tables match there, which was where the one spot where Bubba Ray took a chair shot from the balcony and fell through like 2 tables. It was awesome. It was a cool spot. But yeah, no, that series of matches, it just redefined tag team wrestling, especially tag team gimmick matches. And you kind of saw it just explode. And honestly, I thought it was some of the best tag team gimmick work ever was the TLC matches. Because the TLC matches, you get the Full Metal Mayhem matches in Impact. You get the some of the lights out matches in AEW. Invest in the tables, ladders, and chairs are kind of intertwined with the lights out and no DQ matches in AEW. And so I really think those 3 teams, Edge and Christian, Dudleys, and the Hardys, really took a step up and kind of changed the direction and projection of tag team wrestling going into, the Ruthless Aggression area on top of the whole birth of TNA wrestling. So,
yeah. That's so crazy, like how much like kind of intertwines with our history of this great sport. Of course, like I said, now that we're kind of transitioning into the Ruthless Aggression era, the Hardys, man, they've had a lot of great matches and moments over the years. A lot of different, characters, characterizations. I think they had probably one of the most emotional splits when everything happened with Jeff and Matt, but maybe that's because I'm an older brother and I'm a brother myself, to where, there was a lot of animosity for Jeff because, going back to kind of what happened with, Michaels and, and Marty, there's always unfortunately that one star that's, for the most part, that better wrestler, that better character, that especially Vince, if he sees something like that, he's going to split a team up,
right.
You're not having individuality.
And I was going to say that, the first split of the Hardys wasn't really anyone's fault except WWE's, because they actually released Matt Hardy due to that backstage issue with, Lita cheating on him with Edge, was Hardy's release from. So the split between the Hardys wasn't really Jeff or Matt's fault on that matter. It was just a backstage personal issue with 3 people that didn't really involve Jeff. But then, typical WWE saw cash grab right there. That's a story right there. So they brought Matt back and had that storyline going, and once Matt came back, they're like, hey, let's get the Hardys back together. They were huge for the early 2000s. But then you also saw teams like just magically come together or just show up. I remember the debut of Eminem. Joey Mercury and Johnny Wrestling, or Johnny Elite, or whatever he goes by, whatever promotion he's in. Joey Mercury and
forgot about that one.
Melina, and they beat the Edge, Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero for the tag titles. I was like, who are these guys? Like, and they beat 2 legends. The tag titles, and I'm like, who are these guys? So, like, you had them show up, and then obviously you had the Basham show up in the, in the Ruthless Aggression era. You had the world's greatest tag team, Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin, which, my God, basically those 2 guys and Kurt Angle are the reason why you see
Team Angle,
the bloodline, where you see the bloodline story going. And actually Kurt Angle just gave an interview and said what you're seeing with Roman, with being the longest champ, originally that was going to be Kurt. That was going to be Kurt and the world's greatest tag team together, and they were going to bring on one other person. and they were going to make that a storyline in the early days of Ruthless Aggression. But it changed. And so what you saw with that back in the Ruthless Aggression era, and then you saw the birth of TNA wrestling, because obviously Jeff Jarrett leaves WWE and he starts a promotion.
Good old Scott Nuts.
He teams with NWA guys, and they just form NWA/TNA, and it just blows up. And then you got teams in that era. You got Beer Money. I mean, Beer Money was great.
Yeah, I love Beer Money.
You had. I'm trying to remember some of the early tag teams. I don't know if Motor Machine.
I'm very terrible when they're a little bit past that. They were getting formed like I think in the middle between our era and the Star team, if I remember correctly.
Right, and I mean, you also had
but he's a big Motor City Machine Gun fan.
Yeah, no, and then you also had Petey Williams and his faction in TNA with all the Canadians. You had those factions in TNA. Yeah. But then you saw a lot of WWE guys jump ship to TNA. You saw Kurt Angle jump to TNA. You saw the Dudleys jump to TNA. Yeah. You saw these guys just jump to that promotion. So I mean, even with the tag teams that WWE had in the Ruthless Aggression era,
Outlaws there,
yeah, you still saw individuals and teams jump ships to TNA, because you got to remember there was nothing else. It was just Impact, it was just TNA, and it was WWE, and TNA was not as big as WWE. WWE ruled professional wrestling basically from the purchase of WCW up until 2019, which we'll eventually get to, but. I mean,
yeah.
For the most part, still had some of the earlier on Attitude Era tag teams still part of WWE in the Ruthless Aggression era.
I think there's a lot of random teams. Kind of going back to that because Benjamin and Charlie Haas was one of the better tag teams, more memorable. You also had the Major Brothers, two Edgeheads, when they were slightly called Major Brothers. I went to when Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins were under Edge, it came out and cost got the whole shenanigan with the Undertaker and Edge and the weird little team for a little bit at championship. It was such a place, and there's a lot of thrown together teams, and I think that's kind of why, really until like recently, but. In WWE, there was not really a lot of tag teams that were just a team. Like normally, it was either thrown together guys or it was like an afterthought. Have random like month to month, maybe championship reigns, and then the team would just disappear, and then you would forget about them, or they'd be jobbers to the stars.
Right, but
I mean, the hard part with that the Ruthless Aggression era a little bit.
Right, but then you also had, like you said, the whole storyline of will they, won't they coexist as a team, all that stuff. But then you also had teams just popping up. You had Caden Murdoch. Caden Murdoch came out of nowhere, and Lance Cade, may he rest, for forever, because he had his issues. But when you look at someone like Trevor Murdoch, who has gone on to win the NWA championship twice. Like he's now had an individual career, but you had those two guys, make a wave in that area. You guys had, you also had the Hurricane and Rosie, as a tag team.
I forgot about that team.
Yeah, you had them as a tag team.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, and Rosie, another one who passed away too soon. You had them as a tag team. So you're right, though. You had too many of random teams put together. Like, you had at one point you had Batista and Rey Mysterio team together. At one point you had Undertaker Batista together. You had Shawn Michaels and John Cena. Then you had the reunion of DX, and in late 2006, early 2007, that feud with the Spirit Squad. So you had these random teams.
The Spirit Squad.
But then you had the teams like the Colognes, Carlito and his brother, that you had the Colognes.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, you had the Colognes together, yes. Which, that's a family. That's a wrestling family right there. If anybody does their research the Colon family, because their history of pro wrestling goes back a while, maybe early 80s. the Colognes pretty much, maybe even late
I'd
70s.
say, yeah. I think
late 70s is where you get the Cologne
'cause,
name in pro wrestling, because I believe their grandfather was a
because I'd be
wrestler.
like second or third generation
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah. Carlito and Primo were third generation. So,
That's
which
right.
by the way, I'm hoping.
Very.
I think Carlito still does independent shows, but I just want to see him live once. I like Carlito.
He's still jacked.
But you know, you had the Colognes, but then again, you go back to the whole putting teams together. You had, you know, Big Show and Edge, and then when Edge got hurt, you had Chris Jericho step in, and so you had Jericho. You know, so just like, and then you
Jericho, yes.
had in the late Ruthless Aggression era were Miz and Morrison. You know, and putting them together.
I think that's a good transition into
yeah, and that's a good transition because those guys actually won Slammy Awards and tag team titles.
Yeah, it's crazy because I liked the Miz. You know, I was a huge Miz mark when I first got into wrestling because this is the time frame when I started watching, right? And I remember the first like match with Miz was against Hornswoggle and Finley. That's another fun team, Hornswoggle and Finley. You know, the most interesting combination. You know, a leprechaun and an Irishman. Who knew that it would work? But you know, it was another one of those fun teams. And to go up against, like I said, the Miz and Morrison, they had the dirt sheet, of course, and was just they were kind of doing social media and doing vlogs and stuff before a lot of wrestlers now do. So they were a huge trailblazer in the sport. But my first match was literally, and I'm in a Leprechaun versus I thought two of the best talents. Like, I didn't know a whole lot of wrestling because my friend just said, "Hey, I know you're just getting into wrestling. Go watch this." And I'm like, okay. And sports entertaining, but man, like Finley can work well. You know, Swoggle has a lot of fun spots in that match. But man, like the Miz and Morrison were probably another one of those teams that just had that good chemistry.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And you look at the trajectory of both of them when they went singles. Both of them had great singles trajectory.
Yeah.
You know, Morrison won the ECW World Title, and he also won the Intercontinental title. And then he goes off and wrestles in Lucha Underground. He wins that title. He wins independent titles. The Miz stays within the WWE. He's very committed to it. And I'm trying to remember if I read this article. Someone wrote an article about how the Miz is just, I believe it was Road Dogg. Road Dogg wrote how the Miz is his number one guy in WWE, just because the Miz is committed to the company. He eats and he's very grateful for it. I mean, you look at someone like the Miz. He's already a two-time WWE champion. He's been a multiple-time Intercontinental champion, tag team champion,
Intercontinental champion.
Well, he's one of the
tag champion. Yes,
he met his wife in WWE. He met Maurice. He's got a beautiful family. He's got a TV show now with them. That's through WWE. He's got everything, and he thanks that to WWE. But like you said, him and Morrison, when they started, they were fresh faces. WWE didn't know what they had when they had them, and they just saw it. They're like, this team's good. I mean, people love this team, and it sucks because you see that a lot in wrestling, and especially with you guys know me. I love tag team wrestling. You see it too much of teams breaking up too soon. And you're like, dude, this was just getting good. Like, let it go. Let it roll, see where it goes. So, and that's what I felt they did with the Miz and Morrison. I felt like they broke them off too soon. They could have had a trajectory of like a DX where they could have been together for years, and still had the success that they could have. Because you look at a team like the New Day, when the New Day, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but you look at the New Day, they were still a team even when Kofi won the WWE title and when Big E won the WWE title. They were still a team.
Yeah, and another thing that was around that era that was actually a really good pairing. And Shrimp Sushi brings a very good team that I'm glad we didn't forget about. Thanks, Shrimp. The Brothers of Destruction.
Yeah.
That was a fun, and one of those fun teams that you can always pair them back up for one of those last couple matches. Especially when they have the whole Saudi Arabia match with Generation X. That not going there, but they had another. That was another. They got put together, which made sense because they had huge storylines with each other. With Undertaker killing Kane's family, or
they were brothers.
Was it Undertaker that killed Kane's family, or was
so
it
the story? So I guess because you got into it late, basically the story of Kane and Undertaker. It's kind of like if anybody reads like old stories, it's basically the same story as Cain and Abel. But basically Kane and Undertaker were brothers. Paul Bearer was in the middle of it. Paul Bearer has just been released of his duties from Undertaker. This was like mid to late 90s. It was Undertaker was feuding with Shawn Michaels at the time. And during this feud, Paul Bearer had claimed that Undertaker's brother Kane was still alive from an apparent fire at a funeral home that had claimed the life of Kane and their parents. But in return, what had happened was Kane debuted at Bad Blood in '97 during the Hell in the Cell match with Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. And so that was his debut. And in turn, what turns out was Kane was the one that started the fire, not the Undertaker. The Undertaker got out of there.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So that in turn, that was the story. But they feuded from like 1997 almost till 2004 for a while because they had a lot of matches because at Survivor Series 2000,
that is a
2003
long feud. I didn't realize that long.
And then it kind of reignited later on because what had happened, and I love telling the storylines because these are just memories. Like Shrimp just said, it brings back memories now. In 2003 Survivor Series, Undertaker feuded with Mr. McMahon, and they had a Buried Alive match at Survivor Series in 2003. Well, Kane showed up and cost Undertaker the match and buried him. So from there on through the Royal Rumble to WrestleMania of next year in 2004, the story was Kane is happy he finished off his brother, but Undertaker returned as the dead man. For anybody who doesn't remember, in the early 2001, 2002, Undertaker had the American Badass gimmick going on. So he had ditched the whole dead man, but in 2004, he came back as the dead man, and he kind of stuck with it for the rest of his career. And 2004 WrestleMania is actually where the streak kind of like started seeing light. The streak was there for WrestleMania, but it kind of was projected now because of Kane. And it was their second WrestleMania match, because they had wrestled each other at WrestleMania 98. But then they rekindled their feud in 2010 when Kane won the World Heavyweight Championship. They kind of feuded again. But yes, they did team up earlier on too as Brothers of Destruction, and then again later on Destruction. So there's a little bit of history there. So from me, Lexi, to all of you, there's your history of Brothers of Destruction and how it came to be.
Well, thank you. I can't remember, but thank you for that one. And I'm glad that you were, especially if there's, we have a lot of good wrestling fans that watch this show. I'm glad that for those of you guys that needed a memory to be recalled from your childhood or from that time frame. Come on. Sorry, I think we're good now.
Yeah, no, you keep going in and out, Lane.
I'm gonna have to do some research this weekend to see if I can figure out a solution because I hate when this happens. I love talking, and unfortunately, I hate when I'm doing a good point and it's like
it just freezes.
So another fun, another team that I thought I liked, when I first started watching wrestling just a weird random one that I just remembered was Eric Boom with I can't remember what Matt Seidel's name was in WWE, but Matt Seidel and Kofi Kingston.
He went by.
That was such a fun high team.
I can't remember what he went by in WWE there. Bourne.
I can't
Evan
remember.
Bourne. He went
Evan
by
Bourne. Yes, Evan Bourne. Yes,
WWE.
thank you.
Yes, he went by Evan Bourne.
Yes,
and Kofi Kingston. Yep.
That was such a fun, like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, whoa, like they're doing like stuff I never thought I would see in wrestling. Well,
Yeah, that's
what
why
I think. Chinlock, double lock, triple A, attitude adjustment, pile driver.
Yeah, that one is when Kofi still had his Jamaican kind of thing going on. His Jamaican gimmick or something.
Yes.
I
love
which was
that
great because it was the DX meeting. I can't remember what, but they were on TV, and then Kofi like talks, and he's like, "We got to start focusing because that team is all." And then Triple H goes, "Wait, I'm a little confused. Aren't you supposed to be Jamaican?"
Yeah, that was, oh my gosh, like. Well, because think
so
about it, people, it just like act like nothing happened, and it just
they forgot that he was Jamaican. No.
And looking at the New Day, right? Like, yeah.
Well, you also have to remember too, in that same time period, not only where you got into tag wrestling, or you got into wrestling, like I had been watching it for a while, so I've been trying to keep on top of every promotion I could. Mostly TNA and WWE, because if I wasn't enjoying something on WWE, I'd see what TNA was doing. And, that's when you started seeing LAX in TNA, Santana and Ortiz start showing up.
Yeah.
And they had a nice little run, with them, and Hernandez was part of that group. And, they had some great matches in TNA, LAX. Both with P.D. Williams and his crew. I keep forgetting what P.D. Williams' team was called. If anybody can remember their name of that team in TNA that P.D. Williams had, please, by all means, go ahead and comment it, because I can't remember for the life of me what the name of it was. But it was like P.D. Williams and like two other guys within the crew, I think. But yeah, their matches with them. But they also had matches with the Dudleys, and I'm pretty sure they feuded with Aces and Eights.
So that time, yeah.
So
Aces and Eights.
I mean,
look, there was a lot of teams and a lot of factions. And a lot of teams now, and a lot of guys on these teams that looking at now are in, AEW. Look at it, look at the roster, right? Looking at some of the teams that were in ROH are now going to be for independent scene. You have War Machine, which are now the Viking Raiders. They had decent success in, I bet they thought, but they had a really great run in NXT. Their takeover match with Ricochet, and Aleister Black, Malachi Black. That is all backing War Machine, versus the Briscoes, War Machine, the Young Bucks. Like, it's crazy to think that all these teams that were in ROH and Impact are on a bigger scale. I was mentioning Santana and Ortiz, looking at how, with the going from LAX to now Pride and Powerful, to see that transition. Of course, you have Red Dragon, and you had, those guys on this for ways a little bit, killing NXT with tag matches and you have the people in ROH.
Right. And obviously with ROH, you really can't talk about tag team wrestling without mentioning probably
cutting out. But yeah, like I said, it's top teams.
Yeah. I was going to say, you can't really mention Ring of Honor, especially, it's 2005, 2006 starting of tag teams to what it was without mentioning some of the big ones, the Young Bucks, the Briscoes. Heck, even El Generico and Kevin Steen were a team in ROH for a while. Obviously, El Generico became Sami Zayn, and Kevin Steen is Kevin Owens, but they were a team for a while. So in Ring of Honor,
it's crazy, to look at. Yeah,
those three teams. They defined Ring of Honor tag team wrestling. Those three, honestly, I don't think Ring of Honor would be where it is with tag teams if it wasn't for those three teams. And then you add in the mix FTR in there a little bit, and then you had the Hardys show up in Ring of Honor a little bit and wrestle, the Bucks and all that. And so, you got to give it to Ring of Honor for also pushing tag team wrestling to the limit. But again, with the Briscoes redefined, what tag team wrestling will always be is two guys who are just really close to each other growing up. I guess you could say the Hardys kind of started it first, but then the Briscoes kind of just took it for their own, and they changed the entire tag team outlook. Where it's just brutal. We watched the match last night of Dynamite, and Mark Briscoe took that elbow and took it to Jay Lethal through a table. And I'm saying, hey, that's what Jay would have wanted. It was violent matches, and that's what the Briscoes did as a tag team, was violent matches. They got physical, so, but yeah, no, I would say, FTR, the Bucks, the Briscoes, and then Kevin Steen and El Generico, those were the established teams in Ring of Honor, and then obviously you had a lot of these. It's really hard because you say tag teams, but then you got to look at factions.
Yeah,
factions do break off to be tag teams. You look at factions like the Bullet Club, teams like the Kingdom. You look at groups like Ace Eight. You look at all these factions that break off to be tag teams. So you look at the Good Brothers.
Yeah,
Carl Anderson and
Good Brothers.
Lou. You look at those guys, and then you got the Bludgeon Brothers. You got Luke Harper and Eric Rowan. So these guys break off from factions and become tag teams.
It's crazy, to look at it too. A lot of people have mixed feelings. It's better than the Young Bucks. Thanks, Mike, for your comment. With really, when you think tag team wrestling, I feel like you have to think those two, they're up there with, when people ask you, hey, what's the best tag team? Usually people will say Usos, Bucks, FTR, Briscoes. That's things we are in a great era of, there's so many different types of wrestling matches. And the reason why I can't pick which team I like better between FTR and the Bucks is because you have, both teams are perfect in their own ways. And when they came together, oh my gosh, when they had, when FTR, and the Bucks had that title match, that was one of the matches I've ever seen. So it's one of those times that it's so crazy, look at tag team wrestling where it is now, and to see, the Trailblazers, I would even say, the Guerrillas of Destiny, GOD, seeing what those guys are doing in Japan. You have a lot of hot talent coming up. You have the Acclaimed. The Acclaimed have been one of the most funniest tag teams, of the last couple of years in AEW. And to see, they were just thrown together and it's worked well.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. I honestly can go with that same sentiment, actually, with with two different styles too. You see the Young Bucks, they're flyers, but with FTR, they're ground and pound tag team wrestlers. They want to beat you up. whereas the Young Bucks are going to hit those high spots and
Yeah.
hit those super kicks. Same thing with when Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn were in Ring of Honor when they were a team, El Generico and Kevin Steen.
Yeah.
They mixed and match, because El Generico was a flyer and he did all this, but Kevin Steen was a mean, just brute. He would beat you up, and so I like the two different styles that you get in tag team. You get a vast different style of wrestling in tag team, especially with the Acclaimed. Because again, we go back to the Acclaimed. These were just two guys put together, and they made something out of nothing. And now they're tag team champions, and they both have great singles matches. Sometimes, when they have to wrestle by themselves, they'll have great singles matches. People forget that some teams that are just put together are just individual wrestlers that just have awesome singles matches. It's just sometimes creative and in promotions, creative just don't have anything from them individually and just say, we can make you a tag team if you guys can make it work. So I mean, I'm sentiment about that, where every tag team is going to have its own style.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Like, there's so many different tag teams out there. You can't also, when you think tag teams too, you also got to look at the New Day and the Usos. Two probably the longest teams together in WWE. To see them, and especially like I said, because the Usos evolved. Like, they went from the face paint to the Uso Penitentiary front since day one ish. And to see that involvement. And then on the flip side, you have the New Day, who had a little bit of character development, and of course, 2 out of your 3 members win the big one, win the championship, and for them to actually be there for each other for that moment, like that was probably one of my last favorite moments of WWE, is when Kofi won that championship. And then when Big E won it was such a big celebration for that trio. And I always was telling people I want the New Day to split up. But looking at it merch wise and fan wise, besides my my professional opinion, you have the New Day was selling the most merch, and unfortunately, it sucks because Big E is still recovering. I think Mike just posted a comment. I'll get to Connor's here in a second because Connor just popped in as well.
Yeah,
but
he did.
With Big E, yeah. So with Big E, unfortunately, he's still out with that broken neck. He doesn't know if he's coming back to wrestling, but he has been very supportive of his New Day brethren. So hopefully, maybe Royal Rumble, since that's here Sunday, it'll be Sunday, or sometime hopefully later this year. Hopefully he'll come back, because I would love to see those 3 do something again. And it's one of those things that I never knew what I was missing until it was gone kind of moments, because like I said, for years, I did not like the New Day. I had a hard time and thought they were each weighing each other down. But if you listen to how they speak about each other, they're going to be one of the most, remembered teams in history. So, really, if we're talking modern wrestling, you got to put the New Day and the Usos on the list too. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the Bucks and FTR have had better years than those guys, but you know what? They've still so at least they're still consistent, and they're still at least doing something on TV. So, like I said, it's crazy with all the talent we have. Look at Impact Wrestling. You have of course, you have Mike Bay and Ace Austin. They're doing a lot of fun work. You, of course, have Motor City Machine Guns on the top of the mountain again. Having that formation come back and just being a great tag team. You have the whole, Violent by Design. There's a lot of great teams in that division that I think in the next couple of years, I think they're going to be on a bigger scale. We've already seen Motor City Machine Guns on Rampage, but I think we'll maybe see them in AEW eventually. I'll just see a crossover. We'll be on Dynamite instead of just Rampage.
Yeah.
So Connor has officially joined the chat. Hey, Connor.
Hey, Connor.
Thanks for watching, brother. We miss you. Hope to see you next week, and I hope everything is going well with your emergency. And yeah, man, good to have you. Connor, let's see. He put my favorite. His favorite tag team of all time is definitely the Hardys. Yeah, we had a really good discussion about the Hardys, and his favorite tag team match coming up was the Hardys versus Team 3 versus Edge and Christian. That was still just crazy match. I've gone back and I've watched it a couple times, this year already, and wow, it's such a great moment.
Yeah, and Connor, we really touched base on that, and we totally agreed with what you said. We definitely think that match itself really changed the outlook on tag team wrestling gimmick matches. I mean, I said it earlier, and I'll repeat myself. I mean, you wouldn't have Full Metal Mayhem, you wouldn't have Lights Out matches, you wouldn't have any of these, especially if it wasn't for that TLC match between those three teams.
Yeah, and like we were talking earlier, the Road Warriors and Harlem Heat. So you must have read our minds, like because we mentioned both those teams. You know, it's crazy. Like, you know, looking back now, looking at the Road Warriors and Harlem Heat, the Dudleys, you know, the Four Horsemen. Just looking at how many, and even the Hardys. Just all throw the Hardys in there. Look how many teams have been inspired by all those acts. You know, you had FTR with the Horsemen. You had the Young Bucks, you know, with the Rock and Roll Express, the Hardys. You know, a lot of people with Harlem Heat, you know, giving inspiration to, you know, African Americans with, you know, having those teams come up like the New Day. So thanks to a lot of these, you know, earlier teams that we saw in the 80s, the 90s, you know, it really developed into probably one of the best. I think we are in probably the renaissance of wrestling right now. You know, I think we have something special.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Those, I mean, you look at those teams. Both those teams really redefined their generation of wrestling. Harlem Heat leads to teams like, you know, the New Day, and the Usos, these diverse teams, you know, and even the Acclaimed, you know, these diverse teams, you know, and then you got the Road Warriors who kind of open the door for these gimmicky teams that are just, you know, that come out to a different style. But you love it, you know, you love seeing that in pro wrestling. The tag teams, you're like, who's the next big tag team? You know, like who's going to be the next era of tag team wrestlers?
Yeah, and it's crazy. Like, you know, it's one of those things like now look right. Like, you know, there's so many different teams, and like there's, especially with Ring of Honor coming back up. You know, with NXT, you know, developing new stars as we speak. Like I said, it's going to be a crazy next few years. And, you know, I would love to do another podcast next year on how the landscape of tag teams has changed in a year to see who's where, you know, who's doing what. Let's see. Let's go to the comments section, shall we? Mike says back to our New Day comment. Big E was a better single star. I agree, especially when he was like Ziggler's muscle man. Like, I wanted Big E to split off. So yeah, I feel like he had a lot of potential depending on what could happen. But I always thought he had a lot of potential to be a great world champion. Too bad, unfortunately, WWE didn't see it that way as much as the fans did. Going to Mike, beer money. Every time I open a Coke and hear the click, I say beer money. Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah, I was the same thing, man. See, man, when they put those two guys together, I was like, yep, perfect.
I think Adam was right that the Guns is going to be 2023's year, but FTR needs to win those tag titles. The first reign wasn't as good.
Well, the first reign wasn't as good because it was very hard during a pandemic year, where there was no crowd. I guarantee you, if there's a crowd, FTR's run probably would have been a lot better for the first time. And I do agree that this year, I honestly think the Guns are going to wrestle the Acclaimed at Revolution, and I think the Guns are going to win those tag titles. It's going to be crazy, but I think there's going to be a miscommunication between the Acclaimed and Billy Gunn, and the Guns are going to win it. And then it's going to lead down the road of Billy Gunn rejoining his sons.
Yeah, they kind of foreshadowed that a little bit last night.
Yeah, but honestly, I think the Acclaim get those titles back. But I think the Guns hold them for a decent amount of time for 2023.
You know, and who knows what could happen. Like, as a time of recording, you know, you have Jungle Hook. You know, we're going back to like the whole wrestling tag teams are thrown together. Jungle Hook, I don't know why, but the two matches they've had, I've been very invested in and have enjoyed both matches. I know that, and I do know that, Jungle Boy and Hook are way better single competitors, but there's just something there. Like you may not need Hook to talk, but there's something that they could do there a little bit. Of course, you have another team another good point I saw earlier on Twitter is La Sex Gods with Jericho and Sammy Guevara. They've only had one title match as a tag team, right?
Yeah.
And I think that something could come of that. And I think they could be the acclaimed challengers at Revolution if we don't go with the Guns.
Yeah, I just feel like at Revolution right now they are leaning towards the Guns versus the Acclaimed right now. So it's just too good of a storyline to go.
Yeah. I think that's the direction they're going to go. Like I said, they had a really good sit down. Like I said last night, if you haven't, I thought it was one of the best moments on the show. A lot of people disagree with that for some reason on Twitter, but I've thoroughly enjoyed that segment last night between two because the Acclaimed, it felt real, that the pain that they were feeling with their whole dad being on the road for most of their life. But then for them to go back into being greedy assholes, greedy little kids, and saying, the only way that they can fix this is those titles. So like there was a very multi-layer to the segment last night, and I thought, like I said, and that's why I think with the ROH, not ROH, but with the the Acclaimed and with the Gun Club, that's gonna be one of the best AEW feuds. I think it might be AEW like tag team feud of the year if FTR doesn't come back, or
right.
Who knows? Like, it's a weird moment in wrestling for sure. And I know we've discussed this many times. I know Connor, Adam, especially in our group chat, we've discussed that. There's times where it feels like there's been ever since FTR has taken a break. You have the more focus with the Lucha Bros and Pac and the Bucks and Kenny with the trios, and the House of Black, with those teams more focusing on the trios championship and doing trios matches. It feels like there's not many like of those tag teams like there was when AEW first started. So I wonder, like I said, how this year's going to shape up because I think Tony's a genius, and I'm wondering if we'll have a split with one of the factions to be a tag team, or it's crazy, like because especially. It's one of those things that I don't know. What's your take on that? Like, do you think we need to work more on tag teams in the division now since the trio belts, or what's your take on that, Adam?
I mean, right now, I do feel like the attention to detail on the tag division is kind of dwindled a little bit because you got a lot of focus on that trios. With the introduction of the trios titles, that was their main focus. And I felt like the tag team titles kind of took a step back. But then there lays the problem when you got a strong team like FTR taking a little break. Now you need tag teams to step up. You just mentioned, Jungle Hook, putting together, but something about that works. You got the Acclaim, doing well with those tag titles. Now you got the Gun stepping up, and that's pretty much your focus right now. Every other team is a faction, and like I said, I feel like you can really excel those tag titles by maybe having two guys in a faction have those titles, and then the third guy in that faction have an individual title. I mentioned it earlier. I'd love to see House of Black. If they don't give them the trios titles, I like to see Buddy and Brody win the tag titles, and then Malachi win either the All Atlantic or the TNT. And have those three guys at least have gold. If they're not going to pull the trigger on the trios titles with that group. But I do feel like the tag team division is kind of thinner than usual within AEW. But I can say that same thing with the other promotion.
Yeah,
I mean, with WWE, all you got is the Usos. I mean, they've pretty much beaten every freaking team in that company, and it's kind of ridiculous. It kind of gets overdrawn. We got thinner roster of a tag team in AEW, but the story's a lot better. And it's not like the Acclaimed have had those titles for a long time. and they got a good challenger in the Guns who could possibly dethrone them at Revolution. But I do think we need to focus on all the titles, in a general sense of the exact thing. Like, you need to focus on all those titles, give those titles the same time share on screen. But like I said, I think with FTR stepping away, I think you really need to look at your division and say, what can we do to make tag teams work?
Well, that's one reason why. Yeah.
We got the trios. Let's focus on tag team.
I think that's why I have a very high respect for FTR, because they brought the Acclaimed up to their level.
Mm-hmm.
Like they made them a bigger star with those belts than they were before, and to where it made more sense compared to just that with Swerve in Our Glory. So I feel like FTR doing that for them really brought that division up. Of course, you have Best Friends that could easily be inserted back into any title picture. Hopefully, Santana Ortiz can hash things out. You have Top Flight, that another one of those specific tag teams that I better now on character and selling and slowing down a little bit. And I think if they work on those couple things, they could be up there with the Bucks, the Acclaimed, the Usos. There's a lot of hungry tag teams out there now.
Yeah, and I will be totally honest, one tag team that I wasn't familiar with until they started promoting, the Forbidden Door pay-per-view was Aussie Open. I had no idea what Aussie Open was, and then they showed up in AEW with, Will Ospreay, and I'm like, who is this team? I thoroughly enjoyed that team. I was like, wow, these guys are a really good tag team. Like, why have I not watched these guys before? So
yeah, it's crazy. Connor even put on there some helpful stuff for ROH's rebrand. He's put I think for the ROH tag team division, they should sign Devon Dudley's sons, TNT, and then move Iron Savages, also known as Bear Country, over. And I think that's a good idea, Connor. I agree with that. I think that would be a good way to build new teams. And with ROH, coming hopefully very soon. I think we'll hear something in March about like a weekly episodic, even if it's an Honor Club, just something weekly, episodic that we'll get very soon. And ROH is going to need tag teams, and really, I think only, unfortunately, with what happened with Jay, you don't really have a couple teams. Like, you only have really the Kingdom at this point. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens. And I think ROH, now I would just run YouTube shows. I would just get free publicity. Just do just film besides Dark. Film ROH beforehand.
Yeah. Honestly, if they go with bringing ROH back to television here soon, you got to make that almost its own 2 hours show. Which I feel I understand the idea of the Honor Club, where you can stream episodes, but at the same time, do you really want to cram all that kind of wrestling into one or 2 days? Whereas you can maybe do a live show of Ring of Honor either Thursday nights. The only thing you're going against on Thursdays are taped episodes of Impact. Those are already taped episodes, but you can always do a live episode of Ring of Honor on a Thursday. And then if you want to do what they're doing with AEW, where they do like an hour special evolution or God, I can't remember, AEW Dark or all that stuff. You can do an hour of that on like a Tuesday, like or like a
and
something like that,
Well, if you think about it too, as we start to wrap up, I just saw a tweet the other day that Warner Brothers and TBS put out saying that she's very pleased with AEW. She's very pleased with Tony Khan and really happy with the ratings. So, like I said, maybe I think somebody's in the Ring of Honor club. So it's gonna be fun to see. Do you have any random teams you want to give notice to before we go off the air? Any
Trying to think. Connor had mentioned that the bar with Claudio and Sheamus, that kind of worked.
Yeah.
But let's go old school. And let's go ECW days. And go Pitbulls. Give them a shout out because
yes,
they were basically the innovators of the tag team dog collar match. They basically took it to another level with the dog collar match. If it wasn't for the Pitbulls and ECW, I don't think we'd see any tag team dog collar matches, especially the one we had between FTR and the Briscoes. But the Pitbulls were another team that I loved watching in ECW. And then obviously, you had Public Enemies.
yeah,
that was a great set. And then God, I can't remember.
There's so many.
There's so many, but for me, I enjoy tag team wrestling. It's just that feel of you got that formula of one guy's getting beat up. He's getting beat up. He's got to get out of there. He's got to get his tag team partner in there. His tag team partner's got to help. And then that hot tag comes and the crowd goes wild. It's just so crazy. I remember doing that a lot watching pro wrestling. I'm like, dude, just tag out. Get that hot tag.
I love the hot tag. Yes.
And it's just there. It is just there. And so, and like you said, it's something that we should look upon, like see what this year holds for tag team wrestling. And then next year come back together and be like, all right, what did we think of last year? And it's so great because with tag team wrestling, you mix and match guys, but then you got guys that have been teams forever that you can put into storylines with other teams, and the styles clash, and I just enjoy it so much. And I'm hoping this is the year of tag teams. Like I really do. We've had years of individuals and gimmick matches and events and all that, but I really want to see this year being focused on tag teams and tag team matches. Especially I'd love to see more representation of mixed tag teams. I'd like to see, now that Adam Cole's back, I'd like to see him and Britt tag team up against another male-female team. And that intergender kind of match kind of stuff where the male and the female can wrestle each other. Like it's like I kind of want to see that. It's the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to I went through a huge especially with some passing. I went through a lot of Briscoe matches the last week, right? And one of the funnest matches that I have seen with the Briscoes is an intergender tag match with the Briscoes and Team Bussy. Effie and Allie.
Yep.
and just a shout out to Bussy, just because it's one of those fun GCW independent teams that no matter who they're going against, they're going to have a lot of fun. They're going to bring stereotypes of the LGBTQ community, especially down here in the South. So shout out to Bussy, because they're killing it on the independent scene. And like your match against the Briscoes, and for the Briscoes to put them over. Effie was talking about it too. It was kind of like that perfect timing, like when you like when everything kind of lines up, like you watch a match and the next thing you know it's on. But Effie was talking about it when he was giving his little dedication to Jay, and he did a funny Jay impersonation. Jay was like, like the Briscoes had just barely gotten in. They were late to the show because their flight was delayed, and when the promoter told Effie, "Hey, go tell the Briscoes that they're dropping the belts to you tonight. Hey, you're putting us over tonight." He's like, "Oh, really? Shit, man, let's go. Shit, yeah. What do you want to do? Let's get your shit and let's go."
I also want to give a shout out to Loud Rebellion in NWA, another tag team that everybody needs to check out. They're lucha style wrestlers, and they are freaking awesome.
I'll have to watch the matches.
They're so good. Yes.
I like good luchadors.
I mean, Loud Rebellion is actually its own kind of professional wrestling group, but it's all lucha, and I freaking love it.
And then my last shout out for the episode is going out to my favorite Impact tag team / independent team, just because they brought the Edgeheads back a little bit with the major players. But Matt Cardona and Brian Myers, aka Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins, heel teams out there. As you guys know, I'm a huge mark for those guys. Like, it's literally my Twitter handle, Major Mark. But those guys have been killing it on the independent scene and in Impact Wrestling. So it's been awesome to see those guys actually a good team and actually showed that instead of just being jobbed out to the Viking Raiders after they beat FTR at WrestleMania in New York. So to see stuff like that, there's a lot of cool random independent, acts out there that I'm glad that we were able to give, it's a small section, but give them a little shine on this podcast tonight.
Yes, well done.
So yeah, I think to be honest with you, this was a lot of fun. I think there was a lot of there's a lot of great input in different teams that we discussed. So in the second below, why don't you guys comment what your favorite tag team was, or your favorite tag team moment with any of the teams that we mentioned before. So thank you guys so much for joining us tonight on Talking Elite. We hope you guys had a great time. Thank you, Adam, again for joining up. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. You just got so much knowledge in that big, beautiful head of yours.
And this bald head of mine, yeah.
So, yes. Shrimp Sushi, just let me see his comment real quick. Shrimp says, "Thank you guys. It was really fun reliving certain moments." Thank you, Shrimp. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I didn't pay him because Shrimp is my actual in real life best friend. So thank you, Shrimp, for watching, and of course, to Ethan and Mike, Connor, of course. Thank you, Connor, for watching. It was a really fun show. I had a lot of fun with this one.
Yes, I enjoyed it thoroughly, and again, I'm always happy to, because of my knowledge, to give background on storylines, because some of them just stick out to me.
Yeah. Next week we have a very fun episode planned, and I'm going to have him on air because he does not know what we're going to discuss next week. So I had this idea today while I was putting together this show. Next week we are going to be talking about some of the best wrestling families. Ooh. So we're going to talk about generations from the Ortons to the Road. Talk about some of the new ones coming up with Pillman Jr. and talking about Brock Anderson and what AEW can do for those guys.
Away, Lane. Stop giving it all away. There's a lot of families. We got a lot to cover.
Yeah. Yeah, so so we're gonna be covering we're gonna be doing generations next week on the All Elite Zone podcast. We'd like to thank you guys so much for listening. I had a great time tonight. Adam, God bless you, man. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you guys hit the bell and like and subscribe down below, because we do watch alongs. Of course, we do Talking Elite, where we do a different topic every single week. And don't forget, of course, we do great watch-alongs for Dynamite, Rampage, and WCW, or just we do a specific wrestler on our rotations as well. We have some stuff coming up in the works. Connor's got a lot of stuff that he is working on currently. We have a couple fantasy booking shows coming out. I think we're going to be planning another card pull eventually down the road. So make sure you guys check out, all that random nerd stuff that we post on here as well. Make sure you guys like us on Spotify. Connor went through Spotify and has added a lot of our episodes. So if you want to go back while you're driving or at work and you don't want to pull up YouTube, check us out on Spotify and Podbean. We are growing, so make sure you guys share with your friends so we can keep this podcast growing. Like I said, thanks again, Adam. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you guys next time.